World of birds, mention anything about the birds, the name that comes to everybody's mind is Dr. Salim Ali. A life of dedication, hard work, and work for the conservation in this country. Dr. Salim Ali will speak about his childhood, his young days in this country, his travels abroad, as well as his expedition to various parts of the country and his views on conservation and his aspirations and his advice for the future generation. What is your earliest recollection of a bird that you saw or you heard?
My earliest recollection?
Yes.
Well, I would say it was the magpie robin that when we used to go for our holidays to Chembur, which was a jungle in those days, not a jungle of industries and pollution and so on. But and there the magpie robin's song was one of the first things we heard in the morning, and it is such a sort of nostalgic thing that wherever I hear a magpie robin song, it reminds me of those days. When probably I was about 7 or 8.
The days when you are going to school?
Yes. Yeah, these were in the school holidays. We used to, in the month of May, we used to go to Chembur.
Which school were you going in those days?
The earlier.
Earlier, yes.
Earlier was a school which gloried in the name of Zanana Bible Medical Mission Girls' School.
Quite a mouthful.
Yes. It was shortened to ZBMM.
But Zanana means girls.
Yes.
So you were going to a girls' school?
Well, when you are small, you are supposed to be a girl. But when you cease to be a girl, they push you out.
And at what stage this famous sparrow that you shot came into your life?
I think it was when I was about 8 or 9. Then I had presented to me a very, very wonderful air gun in those days. It was a 500 shot Daisy air gun. And it was really a toy, because you could never hit anything with it. Unless with a lot of practice, if you wanted to hit something, you had to aim 3 inches above and 5 inches on the side, and so on. So you had to get used to it. But you did sometimes.
That means you could still aim a gun at someone and get away with it.
Well, the thing is that it was a chance, as much for the bird as for the shikari.
And the shikar, in those days, I believe the shikar was a status symbol in the family, in the country, when the sahibs, the Europeans were going for shikar. Where were you going for shikar in those days? What was the...
Well, when I was a schoolboy, we used to spend the winter holidays with my brother, who was in the civil service, and he was in Sindh at the time. And he used to be on tour in the winter, and he used to get boys of the family who were keen on shooting there at that time. Sindh was a wonderful place for small game, and it remained so even till before the Second World War. I don't know what it is now, because...
What kind of game? Was it?
A small game, mostly birds, duck and partridges and hare and chinkara and Buster, the Hubara Buster. That was a great thing. But it was really not much of a sport, this Hubara. The great thing about it was the skill of the camel drivers who saw the bustard from a distance of about 500 yards. They're really quite magical the way they saw them, because the bustard is a very cryptically colored bird, and even with binoculars you have to get used to it to pick it out of its surroundings. But these camel men used to spot it and then work the camel round in reduced circles till you got quite close to it and shot it. So there was really not much in it. But
how many did you shoot?
I don't. Luckily, I don't remember.
Your brother Hamid, how did he influence your way of life and thinking?
Well, he was a naturalist himself and very keen about birds and about everything in nature. And I didn't get much encouragement from the elders at home. But whenever he came to Bombay, he came occasionally to visit the old people in Bombay. And he always gave me different kinds of encouragements, and he knew that I was collecting the eggs of birds. So the thing that I remember most is his giving me an egg collecting kit made by Roland Ward and Company. And that really got me on. And then every time he got a chance, he used to encourage me to.
How did your contemporaries, I mean your cousins and other family members, look upon you as kind of a...
They were also very keen. Most of the boys of my age were very keen about shooting and so on and so on. But they were not very keen about knowing anything about what they shot. They just shot for the fun of it and ate it.
Now, apart from the family, you must have had quite a number of friends who were going to school with you. How were they feeling about your interest in birds? I believe those days...
Well, it was not very obvious or apparent. I mean, those who knew me knew. But for instance, the school friends and so on, they were not, they didn't know that I was so keen about birds and so on. Although I did present my collection of eggs and so on to St. Xavier's High School. There may be some even now there, I don't know.
Who were your contemporaries in your early days, whom you remember now? Whether he is alive or...
No, unfortunately, the one that I came later on to meet after several years and to become very close, because he lived just above us in a flat. Unfortunately, he's dead now. But he was this Usman Subani, who was quite a figure at that time, being connected with Mahatma Gandhi's movement, and his brother Umar was really much more deeply connected with that than Usman, who was just on the borderline.
Do you remember any men of letters who are living today?
There was no one that I was particularly intimate with, but of course there were. There was Mrs. Sarojini Naidu. How could I forget that? She was a very regular and frequent visitor to Usman. And on the way up, there was no lift, so she stopped at our flat to take breath. And we had some very interesting she was a very wonderful teller of stories of the inside workings of the Congress and the whims and foibles of the of the people, and she was always good at pouring oil on troubled waters. And Gandhiji had a great love and friendship for her. And it was really, she was the sort of catalyst between and the great thing about her was that she had a wonderful sense of humor. She was quite willing to laugh at herself and laugh at others and so on, but without any kind of malicious thing and so on.
The Khilafat house was somewhere nearby where you stayed in Baikla, was it?
Which?
The Khilafat house.
The Khilafat house was not nearby, but all these Khilafat people used to come to Umar Subhani, who used to live in the next door's house. And of course Usman was above. So they always came there, and so we met.
Was your wife Tehmina with you at that
Yes,
time?
yes.
That is after your marriage,
Yes.
that you moved into Baikla.
This was when I was working at the Natural History Society, just before going to Germany.
But even before that, soon after your marriage, you had been to Burma as a businessman.
Yes.
You wanted to be a businessman, and it is our good luck that
I
you...
did not want to be a businessman, but I was pushed into it to escape mathematics at college.
So it is our luck that you were not a successful businessman. You came back to the bird. So
I suppose that if I had paid more attention to business than to bird, I wouldn't have come off so badly.
Well, you have not come very badly, I think. Going back to your marriage, when did you and how did you meet your wife, Tehmina?
Well, I didn't know that, but I was told that we were at the Zanana Bible School together. In those days when I was, I don't know what, 5 or she was 4, but she, at the age of 5 or so, she and her parents went and settled in London. So I never saw her till she came back in 1915 or somewhere about there. And she had had all her education in England and lived under quite different conditions. And so I was rather nervous at the start because my life was living in dark bungalows and forest bungalows and...
Did you explain to her before your marriage about your life, all these problems?
Yes, but then when girls are keen, they are willing to put up with anything. But to actually do so is the great thing. And I must say that I would never have been able to continue my bird work if I had a grumbling wife at home. And because we were really, financially, we were very bad and we had to stint a lot. And I didn't mind, but she was quite unused to that kind of thing. But she seemed to enjoy it. And
how was the life in Burma? This wolfram mining, with the war going on one side, and you had to go around in the...
No, the war was going, the First World War really didn't touch India at all. In fact, I think it did some, we didn't suffer. There was nothing like what we were in the Second World War, always on the point of attack and all that. But business was also very good. Apart from the mining business, the other business was all very good and so on. There was no depression. And we didn't really feel the effects of war very much.
During your time, during the time you stayed in Burma, were you able to get out into the countryside, into the forest,
Well, that was the beauty of this mining business, that it was situated far out in the jungles, and you had to go and live there for several days at a time. And that is how I got sidetracked.
Apart from the bird watching in your earlier days, were you interested in games, other games like?
Very much. And that was one of the other attractions. Natural history and shooting. There are a lot of opportunity for shooting, particularly big game there. Like tiger and bison and so on.
Have you shot a tiger?
Shall I admit it?
Well, if you had done it before, nobody's going to.
When it was a respectable occupation, yes, I have shot too.
What was your experience in those days?
What about tiger? I think the way tiger shooting was done was absolutely, I don't know what fun we got out of it, because we sat on a tree and we tied a poor little calf or something, and when the tiger came and killed it, we shot it from a distance of about 20 yards or so.
Okay.
So there was really nothing in that. The only thing was, the thing became exciting when you wounded it and had to follow it. So the effort always was to shoot it so that you don't have to follow it.
Bring it as near as possible.
One of my brother-in-laws, he was a very keen shikari, but his main ambition in life was to shoot a tiger. And actually he lived for that, and he died for it, because he wounded a tiger, and he was so excited to get the pelt, I suppose, that he followed it up in a thickly wooded jungle, and the tiger heard him coming, and before he could...
At some time of your life, you went to Germany. Now, how did that come about?
But that was when I had this job of nature study teaching, guide lecturer in natural history at the newly built natural history section of the Prince of Wales Museum. So the society said that we've got up such a good museum, but there's no educational advantage being taken of it.
Bombay Natural History Society.
Yes, Bombay Natural History. So they pressed the government at the time, who very unwillingly sanctioned a post, and I was appointed to that post. But and it worked very well, and this is really what we have now, is a continuation of that thing, which had dropped out. But when we got our independence, then Mr. Kher, who was the minister, he resumed the thing. So I was teaching, I was taking around schools and sort of visiting schools and taking people out and all that. But then after a couple of years I got tired of it, and I said, this kind of teaching is not in my line, and I would like to qualify for serious scientific ornithology. There was no institution in India, no university or anywhere where you could get this training. So I got in touch with people in the British Museum and also in the Berlin Museum. And at that time, our relations with the British were very much sour, because it was 1929, and that was just the time when the movement had hotted up. So they were not very keen to have me. And so I went to Germany, where whom I later on called my guru, Professor Stresemann. He was so nice and kind and so willing to teach, and he had so much to teach that I think that was the time when I really got the best of my...
How did you travel to Germany? Was it in ship. Was your wife with you?
Yes, at that time my wife was with me.
That was your first trip abroad into.
Yes. Yeah.
What was the life like when you arrived there?
Well, there was great poverty, and yes, you said that nowadays you never see anything like a beggar, but in those days they were quite common, and they were really in a bad way because there was this depreciation of currency. I mean, it would change from 1,000 times, so that every day or 2 days you would find it entirely different, and people couldn't, I mean, it had got quite out of hand. And
where did you stay in Germany when you went?
In Berlin, because I had to go to the museum every day, and it was in a sort of boarding house where the landlady was terribly shocked because there was another Hindu couple staying there. So he said, "What is this? You say you don't eat pork, and they say we don't eat beef."
But what did you end up eating finally? Did you stop eating pork, or they stopped eating?
No, I didn't eat pork. How should I eat pork?
But did you know German language when you went there?
Well, before going to Germany, we had a German teacher here, a German lady married to an Indian who used to come and teach us for 6 months or so before we went. And by that time, we could just fire off whatever we wanted and so on. But I was very slow in learning, whereas my wife got away with it because she didn't bother if she made any mistakes and so on. And I was unnecessarily touchy about speaking correctly. So I got left out, and she was quite fluent by the time we finished.
Now, with the Professor Stresemann, how did you converse with him? Was it English?
Oh, he is English. He is a linguist who speaks and writes scientific papers in German and French and English and Italian, as if it was his own language.
What was the routine? Were you going to the museum, spending most of the time there, or did Professor take you out into the countryside?
No, he had asked me to bring a collection of Indian birds with him, and he showed me how this taxonomical work was done. And I was identifying by it's a collection made by one Mr. Stanford in Burma. And I was able to work out and all the fine points of taxonomy and so on. And it was mostly that. But then in the migration season, he took me to Heligoland, which was the great place where the German ornithological station was. And that is where I got my first experience of ringing migratory birds on a large scale, and how it was all done and so on.
What does this Heligoland trap mean? Did it originate in Heligoland?
No, Heligoland is a sort of rock standing out of the sea about 200 feet, just rock. And the wind is so strong that no trees grow on top. But it is right directly on the route of migratory birds. So what they did was they dug an area, say 150 yards by 50 yards or so. They dug it about 6 feet, a sort of trough. And they grew trees in that, and bushes, and it was all a bushy area. So the birds passing over saw this greenery and they came down. And the Heligoland trap is so made that it covers all these trees, and it's made of wire netting, letting the birds come in from the top, and then later on it is covered. So that in the beginning it is open for the birds to come in, and then people walk in. So that the birds are driven more and more into the wired area, and it gets narrower and narrower, and at the end of it there's a little box with a glass sheet, so that when the bird gets there, it thinks that this is the open place and tries to get out. So the 20 or 30 birds get into that box, and they drop the door, and they get the birds out. And it's very successful down Heligoland. And it's been tried in so many different places.
Are they still operating it?
Yes, this is a fixture there. The garden known as Sapskule, that's meant for this bird migration study.
When did you return from Germany?
I returned after about 9 months. Some of the time we spent in England later on at the British Museum and so on. But the first good news I got as soon as I got off was that the government had cancelled, had axed that post. So I was jobless.
You are happy that the post was abolished, or?
Well, I'm happy now, but I was not very happy then.
But what did you do? Did you get back to?
Well, we stayed with friends and relations and so on, like gypsies, till and I was trying all over to get a job, but in those days a job of natural history was almost impossible to get. So just to keep the wolf from the door, I took on a job in a cotton firm.
Do you remember the name?
Yes, it belonged to some relations of mine, and Fatehli and Company. And they didn't really have a vacancy, but they saw my plight and they said, yes, you come along and work here. But it was a very poor, and my wife got a job as secretary to the Women's Council. So between the two of us, we could just manage to carry on. But this, of course, couldn't go on forever, and I was still looking out for a job.